Welcome to the 2022 Macquarie and WiBF Innovation Showcase. My name is Jen Dallitz, and as the CEO of Women in Banking and Finance, it's my great pleasure to be here with you today on International Women's Day. I acknowledge that I'm on Gadigal country today and extend my respects to the traditional owners of the lands from which we all come together, wherever you may be joining us. The Macquarie Innovation Showcase has become an annual event in our WiBF calendar that I'm especially fond of. It's curated by the fabulous International Women's Day Committee at Macquarie, a diamond corporate member of WiBF, and has earned a reputation for stretching our minds and encouraging us to step right up to the boundaries of what is truly possible. This year's theme recognises the contribution of women and girls around the world working to change the climate of gender equality and build a sustainable future for us all. But really what I want to say is that today's conversation is to focus all of us on what we must all do to respond to the climate emergency we are all facing right now. The 2022 World Economic Forum's Global Risk Report is dominated this year by environmental risks, with climate change related risks alone accounting for 3 of the top 10 risks by severity over the next 10 years. My 13-year-old son Ethan grew up on the land with me in Gundungurra country and has an indisputable connection with the natural environment and ecosystems on the farm we call home. In his lifetime, he's seen this home under attack by bushfires, floods, droughts, dust storms, tornadoes, erosion, major weather events that threaten the flora and fauna and fertility of the land around us. But he knows it's not just our backyard. It's happening everywhere. He sees the impact of climate change, and so do his young friends, and they wonder why we adults aren't doing more to protect the planet. This next generation absolutely expects that adequate action will be taken to arrest and reverse climate change, repair and preserve the environment, and ensure a sustainable future for all Australians, for all generations. It's not too much to ask, is it? So then we come to the how. How are we to correct the decisions of the past and look towards creating a more sustainable future? We are so fortunate today to be hearing from a panel of eminent experts, each tackling this issue head on. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to Macquarie for hosting this important event, and I trust you'll find it an enlightening conversation.
Hello and welcome everybody. As we've just seen, the scale of the challenge we face in mitigating and adapting to our changing climate cannot be understated. 4 months ago, I attended the United Nations Climate Change Conference COP26 in Glasgow and took part in discussions with business and world leaders to identify and commit to ways we can accelerate the much needed transition to a low carbon economy. And what was striking there, and is applicable to the topic of gender equality on International Women's Day, was how far the debate had advanced beyond whether there's a need to act. and yet how much further we still need to go to reach the required destination. Now, the need for urgent, widespread action to mitigate further climate change and manage the impacts of existing change is now broadly accepted, and there's growing impetus behind delivering it. But sadly, the same cannot be said for gender parity. While we've been clear about the social and economic benefits for a long time, the journey to realising them has slowed. According to the World Economic Forum's most recent Global Gender Gap report, another generation of women will have to wait for gender parity, which will now not be attained for 135 years, up from 99 years in 2020, as some of the hard-won gains have been eroded by the COVID-19 pandemic. And yet, overcoming gender inequality is critical to overcoming the broader challenges we face as a society, including climate change. And talking with clients, partners, colleagues, and governments in Glasgow, we agreed that the answer to climate change does not lie in off-the-shelf solutions, because if it did, we would have made much more progress well before now. Instead, this key challenge of our generation requires the imagination, ideas, and innovation that emerge when you bring together diversity of thought. Without equal representation of women in the development and implementation of solutions to this and other issues, we're restricting our scope of ideas from the outset. So at Macquarie, we've long recognised the importance of a diverse workforce and view it as one of our greatest strengths. It allows us to challenge each other's perspectives and form better collective decisions, and it gives us greater understanding in serving a much broader client and community base. We understand also that not everyone has the same starting point or journey to get to where they're going, and we work hard to embrace a culture of equity, one that starts by understanding the barriers that people face and provides support in breaking them down, allowing each of them to reach their full potential. So just as the world's nations and companies are coming together to devise creative solutions to the obstacles in tackling climate change, so too is there an imperative to do the same for those encumbering gender equality if we're to build a resilient future society and dynamic future economy. Empowering all people to achieve their full potential will not only drive the best response to climate change, but to a broad range of social issues. The gender balance challenge is even greater when we look at growth areas like technology and green jobs. So we need to raise awareness amongst women and girls about the great opportunities that can come from studying STEM subjects, equipping them with the skills needed for jobs of the future, and supporting them into work in growth industries. And of course, we all need to be flexible and inclusive in order to retain them. International Women's Day is first and foremost an opportunity for us to celebrate the contribution of women and girls, both here and across the world. But it's also a time to consider how we accelerate the further change needed to build a better, more sustainable future. One that is not only sustainable in the environmental sense, but that is also sustainable from an equity of opportunity perspective and offers women and girls the chance to deliver to their full potential. So I hope you will find today's discussion engaging and enlightening.
Thank you for joining us. I'm pleased to be hosting today's panel as we delve into the theme of gender equality today for a sustainable tomorrow. We'll hear about how our panelists are addressing social and environmental sustainability in their work across the investment landscape, in large-scale green energy projects, and within our universities and think tanks. My name is Miura Ryan, and I'm Head of Corporate Development and Strategy within Macquarie's Retail Bank, Banking and Financial Services. I've been with Macquarie Group for 17 years, and prior to joining BFS last year, was the Global Head of Business Improvement and Strategy and Head of Macquarie Group Foundation. In my current and previous roles, I've had the opportunity to work closely with Macquarie's businesses,
looking at the role Macquarie can play in accelerating the transition to a lower carbon economy. We're live streaming the event today as well as recording it, so the session can be made available to WiBF members afterwards. The video we just saw and Shamara's welcome helped set the scene for us. So let's now introduce our panelists and kick off our conversation. First, Deana Mitchell, Equities Analyst at Australian Ethical, one of the managers currently on the Macquarie Wrap platform. Deana covers the technology, diversified financials and education sectors. And prior to joining Australian Ethical, spent 14 years at Macquarie, including as head of ESG research. Next, we have Professor Peter Ralph, Executive Director of the Climate Change Cluster, founder of Deep Green Biotech Hub at the University of Technology, Sydney. And finally, we have Kirsten Hannon, a Division Director in the Green Investment Group at Macquarie. Over the last few years, and even more recently, we've seen a change in our discourse of women shifting the way in which we champion causes and use our voices and experiences to move a debate forward. And this is no different on the topic of climate. As Shamara said, not too long ago, the conversation was about whether there was a need to act on climate change, and this has certainly moved now to discussing the specific work still to do. Kirsten, I'd like to throw to you first. You're part of a team that has led some incredible renewable energy projects in Australia and globally. Can you share with us a little bit about some of these projects and the impact they're having?
Thanks, Mira. Yes, I've worked at Macquarie for almost 25 years, and for about the past 5 years I've been focusing on renewable energy development projects here in Australia. I'm part of a global team though within Macquarie called the Green Investment Group, which is one of the world's largest teams of specialist green investors and developers. We're active in over 25 markets, creating new green infrastructure, working across mature and emerging green technologies, and we have a simple mission to accelerate the green transition. Here in Australia over the past few years we've successfully progressed 3 wind farm projects through development and into construction, and they're all now operating and producing clean green energy. To get to that point, we had to secure revenue contracts. We undertook all the procurement activities and negotiated all the necessary project contracts, and then we arranged financing for the projects. A combination of financial capital and technical and commercial expertise has enabled these projects to progress from ideas to renewable energy generators connected to the electricity network. The amount of energy produced by these 3 projects will be enough to power the equivalent of more than 400,000 homes, and will avoid greenhouse gas emissions of more than 1.5 million tonnes of CO2 equivalent per year by displacing energy produced by thermal generation. In addition, there are new jobs created for each of these projects, and there's economic stimulus in the regional communities where they're located. We have a pipeline of other development projects underway, and we continue to look at opportunities to do more and to do it more quickly.
Thanks, Kirsten. Peter, it'd be great to hear from you next. The UTS Climate Change Cluster connects businesses and community members with cutting-edge algae biotechnologies and innovation support so we can build a green future together. Could you share with us some of the exciting work the department is currently doing and what role these technologies or innovations are planned to have?
The exciting thing that we've got at our tips of our fingers is technology that's going to allow us to transform virtually every industry. So many of our industries depend on carbon, and what we can do is we can take the carbon from the atmosphere, address climate change, and create products that decarbonise our industries. And this is the really exciting thing. So we're working on carbon capture and use. So we use the products that we capture and make transform industry. These are the new green industries that we need. So I'll give you 3 examples that we're working in at the moment. So the first one is we announced earlier last week that we're starting to work with Piping Hot. Piping Hot's an iconic Australian surf brand, and we're working with them to transform their fibres from being a synthetic fossil-derived fibre to a synthetic seaweed-derived fibre. So that fibre that goes into the production of those clothings will now be carbon negative as opposed to being something that contributes to climate change. Second example is a local brewery, Young Henry's. We've been working with Young Henry's for now probably 3 years. The opportunity here is to demonstrate how you can work with a carbon emitting industry, such as a brewery, capture their CO2, put it into the algae, and then create a new product from that, which we're feeding to cattle to reduce their methane emission. So this is an example of circularity where we can capture a waste, turn it into a product, and address climate change in the same move. So this is really exciting. Third example I'll give you is some work we're doing in the Philippines. This is a social impact work where we're transitioning artisanal fishers from being dependent upon a single market that they grow seaweed and sell it for agar. We're creating an opportunity for them to make bioplastics. These fishers can grow the seaweed, convert it into a base material for a bioplastic and sell it for a higher margin. So this is transforming how these families and villages work. And by increasing the income to the family, they're going to have more of their kids going to school. And so this is phenomenal work that we can really get excited about how we're impacting on society outside of Australia. So there's 3 examples of how we're transforming industries.
Thanks, Peter. Just incredible examples. Deana, next to you, Australian Ethical has a long history of investing in companies based on their environmental and social performance and has a strong ESG overlay across the investment framework. Could you share with us what you look for in your decision-making process and how does that ensure that you drive impact through these investments?
Yeah, we'd love to. I'll address the first part of your question because our approach is quite different. So on our decision-making process, it's 2 steps. We will always have 2 lenses on all of our investments, an ethical lens and a financial lens. And we invest in companies that meet both of those criteria. So on the ethical lens, companies are assessed according to our ethical charter, and we allocate capital to positive companies and avoid harmful ones. For every single investment we're making, we're undertaking a comprehensive and forward-looking assessment against our ethical charter. We're looking not only what a company does, but also how it does it. And we question whether the business is aligned and is it part of a better world or on the path of helping us to get there. The second consideration is the investment or financial lens, and a thorough assessment of the financial performance, cash flow, sustainability, management and its operations are undertaken to assess whether it's a viable investment. Because we are stewards of capital, we need to ensure that there's a solid investment case through each of these investments that we make. For example, we invest in renewable companies. There's a big decarbonisation push, so renewable investments support our ethical lens. But we don't just own these renewables because of this credential. They're strong cash flow generating, growing and paying solid dividends. So there are dual benefits that fit both the investment and the ethics side. We also have other investments like earlier stage developing technologies, clean energy technologies, storage technologies, and these are all very important as part of our decarbonisation journey and ecosystem. And while these are more earlier stage and seed investments, we hope that they play a future role in new industries that will replace old ones. The second part of your question is on impact, and we do that through a number of ways through our ethical stewardship. We're speaking to banks on the alignment of lending to the Paris Climate Agreement, and we think we are getting some on these fronts are starting to make change through coordinated efforts, but more still needs to be done. And our efforts on impact extend beyond the climate discussion. We're also engaging companies on diversity, governance, risk management, disclosures, and animal and human welfare.
Thanks, Deana. Peter, back to you. We heard in Shamara's opening about supporting women into future-focused areas, including the energy transition, and the importance of making women and girls aware of the opportunities that can come from studying STEM subjects. In Australia, women graduate in high numbers, but are underrepresented in STEM fields. Do you have a perspective on why this is, and what can we do to help shift the dial?
It's absolutely a challenge, and from a personal perspective, I do my part on open days, and I really enjoy when all of the high school transitioning students come through and they're saying, you know, which courses should we be doing? And, you know, I'm talking about climate solutions training. As soon as I find a young woman that's interested in engineering, engineering, maths, chemistry, and if she wants to do biology, I suggest that she goes off and does the hard, the less appealing subjects, and then comes back to me for honours. And so I've had a number of mathematicians go off and do hardcore maths and then come back and do modelling as a postgraduate or as an honours. Lily Cerner was one of my old honours students. She did her honours on modelling climate impacts on the Great Barrier Reef. And these are the kind of women that we need to be able to encourage to play to their strengths, do the engineering, do the maths, do the chemistry, and then come back into the biology. And that's where our institute has so many engineers, chemists, mathematicians who are women, who are working at the interface between the less traditional areas where women go and into climate change. So it's a very, very active place. But one of the challenges I've had over COVID is disproportionately the number of staff that I've lost during COVID has meant that a lot of those women, the women engineers, have returned home to Europe, have returned back to Southeast Asia. And I've got a challenge over the next year or two to find new, well-trained women who have those skills. They're out there, but we need to promote it. And universities also need to be growing the international pool of women leaders in these spaces. So I've trained over my years Iranian students, Pakistani students, Thai students, and they all come with their background, traditional knowledge, and by being educated in the Australian system, they've developed a greater awareness of equity. They return home to their home countries and they do brilliantly in those home countries. I've had half a dozen Thai students from one group that keep sending me well-selected, well-trained undergraduate students from Thai universities. We train them in the Australian system, they return to Thailand. So I think there's some really good things that universities can do, but we've got challenges ahead.
Yeah. Kirsten, what led you to a career in the green energy space? Are you seeing more women moving into these roles? And from your experience, what more can we be doing?
Lots of different things combined to lead me into a career in green energy. I have a background in infrastructure and investments. I want to do meaningful work. I have a brother who's an environmentalist, and he and my kids have helped ensure that I have an enduring environmental conscience. I took the opportunity about 5 years ago to think quite deeply about what I wanted to do next in my career, and that happened to coincide with a period of strong growth in the green energy space, both generally and here at Macquarie. So that's how I ended up doing what I'm doing now. I do think there are more women interested in moving into these sorts of roles, and I think some of that is about a desire for purpose in our work. We want to be deliberate about how we spend the time when we're away from our loved ones or our favourite pastimes. In terms of what more we can be doing, I think I agree with Peter, it's sort of about promotion. I think the important thing is to educate young women about the different options and pathways. In the renewable energy sector, there are roles for everyone, no matter their expertise. You can be a town planner, an engineer, a scientist, a builder, a researcher, a data expert, an economic modeller, a banker, an investor. Lots of different paths can lead to a career in renewable energy, and I think we just need to get that message out there.
Thanks, Kirsten, for bringing that to life for us. Deana, what's your experience been? What are your thoughts on what we've just heard from Peter and from Kirsten?
Yeah, my perspectives are probably more from the finance angle, as I've been involved in recruitment for roles in the investment space, and it's been an issue for a long time. I don't think we've quite remedied the situation because diversity gaps, for example, in the type of role that I'm in, are still very obvious, and I'm one of a smaller group versus the male cohorts in the industry. The way that I think about this is that quotas are one way, and that has resulted in significant change for top 100 companies at a board level. But broader cultural change is important. We need to evolve the cultures and workplaces to accept diversity as the norm, have successful female role models within these industries for young females to aspire to. I also think that roles need to adapt for growth of an individual. For example, when starting a family, flexibility is important. And I think the pandemic has accelerated this flexibility concept. But the reason why I think we need to hold on to it is because we can see a gap between growth of an individual. There is a gap between representation at a study level in finance, which appears more balanced, to representation at a senior level, which is not balanced. So the female representation studying commerce is closer to balance, but for roles in senior roles, statistics show it's somewhere between 5 and 20%. It varies between areas of finance. So I think this tells us that we're losing women along the way. They're dropping out between the entry level and the C-suite. There's a big dropout rate. So while there's a lot of work done at the entry end and the top end, we also need to make sure that the middle is not forgotten too, offering mentoring, career development and flexibility. Australian Ethical has signed up to the FSC Women in Investment Management Charter, and that's designed to introduce accountability and transparency on women in investment management roles, as well as partnering with Future Impact, an industry initiative to attract diversity of talent. So while cultural development could be a multi-year, might be a multi-generational process, so we need to work faster and concentrate our efforts on ensuring a better balance in workplaces and work better at fostering that inclusive culture. And in agreement with Peter, more broadly, education for women is so important. And one of our foundation objectives focuses heavily on educating and empowering women and girls to provide greater access to education and advancing women's wellbeing. Education is the foundation that can help women achieve their financial independence, which will lead to their personal, financial and career security.
Thank you all for those insights. There's lots to hear there. So now I have a question for all of you. In each of your roles, how have you seen access to capital or funding have a positive impact on climate, environment and sustainability outcomes? And what's your view on whether the level and pace of acceleration is right? Perhaps we can, straight back to you again, Deana, perhaps we can start with you.
Sure. Look, greater scrutiny, restriction on capital. This is having an impact on the negative projects. So we can look at the Adani case study. The project is not aligned with achievement of Paris climate goals. And while not dead, it has been slowed and probably seriously wounded by investors, banks and insurers ruling out involvement in that project. We are, through engagement, starting to see the same level of financial sector scrutiny of new oil and gas projects, because a number of these new projects are on drawing boards, and some at least are not consistent with a transition to net zero by 2050. More urgent change is needed. So in terms of the other way, the access to capital or funding can be used a positive impact. We, via our investments in our balance fund, have provided capital to help with startup companies in seed, angel or early expansion phase. One investment that we're focusing on is looking at plants, their natural ability to store carbon in soil, and another looking at energy storage solutions. The path of decarbonisation will give birth to new industries and replace other ones, or even have the potential to outgrow the ones that we want them to replace as we transition. We invest in industries where we think we see having an opportunity to develop a more sustainable future. So that could be renewables, but it could also be in areas like waste, diet or water. Alternative solutions for durable, biodegradable plastic replacements or diet, exploring alternatives to diet and proteins. Water scarcity is also an important ESG issue as a function of global warming. It's a precious asset that should be managed as a scarce resource, and we own shares in a water technology solutions company, and they're involved in the design, installation and maintenance of irrigation software and hardware. They aim to help with water scarcity by maximising water availability and agricultural productivity through improved irrigation works, because some areas, only 40 to 50% of the water supplied to agriculture actually reaches the crops.
Wow, there's some great examples there. Peter, if I turn to you next on that one.
Look, Deana's comments were music to my ears. She understands exactly where the opportunities in the innovation is happening. I want to cast us back to Shamira's opening comments about this is not off-the-shelf technology. This needs to be innovation. If it was on the shelf, we'd already be using it. And this is where I've seen a dramatic change in the interest of the banking and the finance sector in biotech innovation. 6 years ago, we had VCs looking over at what innovations were happening. These days, this year, even through COVID, VCs, seed fund, angel investors are all now actively involved in supporting this innovation. They realise that there's risk involved in some of this science, but we have to move rapidly forward to find these solutions to de-risk industry so that we can actually massively scale up these solutions so that the planet can mitigate against climate change. So I'm very encouraged by the capital that is moving into this space literally in the last year or two. The opportunities, I think universities are learning how to work in this space because we have the ideas, we have the solutions. It's just a matter of scaling them rapidly enough to be able to get to industry. And that takes a slightly different mindset to what universities are used to. So no, I'm very encouraged by it. I think one of the exciting things is learning how the banking and finance sector internally develops the expertise to pick where the right investments and the right science, the right engineering actually resides. And I think so far I've found that all of the advisors, the fund managers that I've spoken to have been well informed and well guided. So I think it's an exciting space, and I'm very confident that we're going to see dramatic changes in our capacity for climate mitigation due to the shift in investment.
That sounds like fabulous progress. Kirsten, maybe if we just hear from you finally, any further reflections?
I think just to speak specifically to capital available for renewable energy projects, there's certainly no limit to the capital available for projects which have well managed risks and which have strong contractual frameworks underpinning their output. Both lending banks and investors provide strong support for these sorts of projects which have contracts that the industry calls power purchase agreements. So projects can enter into power purchase agreements with energy retailers or with corporates who are looking to meet sustainability goals. The problem is that these contracts are difficult to secure. So there are a lot of renewable energy projects under development that are hampered by limited access to expensive capital, which in turn constrains the energy transition. And I think that is one problem that if we could solve, if we could find low cost funding for those projects, we would be able to accelerate the transition. So I don't think there certainly seems to be no limit to the capital available, but you know, it's available in certain pockets and it's not available on a widespread basis.
Thanks, Kirsten. So look, I'd like to finish today with each of you sharing a reflection, comment, or something that excites you about the sustainable tomorrow we're all building. Perhaps if I start with you, Peter.
What I'm hoping to see change in industries is circularity, because at the moment we're talking about sustainable decarbonisation. We've got strategies to fix climate change. But as Deana mentioned, water, nutrients, these are big problems. We're not going to be able to feed 9 billion people with the amount of fertiliser that we've got on the planet. So we need to start thinking about circularity That's the next step in sustainable solutions. So how do we take the waste from one industry, whether it's a food waste, an agricultural waste, how do we convert that into a product that takes atmospheric CO2, creates a product that we then consume. And then once we're finished using that, we compost it, anaerobic digest it, and the carbon cycles around, the nutrient cycle around, the water cycles around. That's going to be a really exciting place for us to move to. But at the moment, circular economies are something that people have on bits of paper. Governments haven't been able to work out how to establish it. Industry hasn't been able to work out how to share waste. So I'm still waiting to see examples of circularity that really work. But boy, we're really trying to bring our partners together so that they can share their waste and be extremely sustainable. So that's the future for me.
Fantastic. Thank you, Peter. Deana, what about you?
Look, very similar. Thank you very, very much for hosting this, but the climate and diversity discussions are very important to me, and I feel comfortable that, we're investing in helping to decarbonise the environment, and, as Peter said, also investing in the next frontier of new industries and technologies, because there is still a lot to do in sustainable food production, tackling our plastic water crisis, and managing scarce resources like water as well. But thank you very much for including me in your panel.
You're very welcome, and thank you for joining us. And finally, to you, Kirsten.
Thanks, Mira. I'm excited by the groundswell of support to build a sustainable tomorrow. I think the fact that we're not debating anymore that there's something that needs to be done, we're finding solutions, we've got innovators, there's funding backing those innovators, and there are so many different ways to contribute to the effort. And so whatever the expertise, there is a way to get involved and to help make a positive difference. And that's what excites me. So, I hope we can all continue, what we're doing, those of us on the panel and everyone working with us. But yeah, I think my message is that there is a way to get involved. If you want to be a part of this, please get out there and contribute.
Thank you, Kirsten. Some very exciting opportunities ahead. So look, that brings us to the end of our WiBF International Women's Day panel event. I'd like to thank our fabulous panellists, Professor Peter Ralph, Kirsten Hannan and Deana Mitchell. I hope you find today's discussion engaging. Whilst clearly there's a lot more for us to do as a society, we have come a long way in the debate on both climate change and gender equality. As we've heard today, there's some amazing progress being made and innovative ideas being explored. And we've also had some great insights from our panelists on what more we can all be doing. Thank you.